Thank you for coming to today's Bad Elf webinar. Today we're going to be introducing base rover functionality for survey grade GNSS accuracy. So today our entire focus will be based around our Bad Elf Flex survey grade GNSS solution, and specifically how we now have a new implemented option, the new base rover optionality that we're really excited about. I will be your MC today. That might be a good thing, that might be a bad thing. So I should probably just apologize for any bad jokes. I am feeling exceptionally dad-like this morning. But I have two better halves with me today. I've got Brett Hackelman, our CTO and co-founder. And we also have Dave Grafton, our GIS analyst. If you've been watching any of these webinars in the last number of months, you're probably pretty familiar with Dave and I. So just to throw it out there, we're going to go ahead and just share the results with everybody for the poll. How familiar are you with base rover? 45% of the people on the webinar are saying that they have no experience at all and that they are here to learn more. Awesome, you are in the right place. 25% said that they have used base rover systems in the past. 30% say that I'm actively using base rover today in the field. So that is a pretty good breakdown, 30% roughly of each, give or take. And the second question, what industry do you work in? And you can select multiples. The highest percentage at 60% was GIS geospatial, followed by 25% in the categories of land survey, natural resources, and government, followed by utilities, educational nonprofits, architectural, engineering, construction, or AEC firms, and then other. So that is great. We appreciate everybody doing that poll. So what are we going to be talking about today about the base rover? This is our agenda. On the left, you can see our discussion topics. We're going to start with what we call a unique geospatial situation. So we're going to catch everybody with a pretty unique project that I think will engage with why we think the base rover is such a good solution and option for you. Again, we'll talk about the innovative solution. That's our Flex, the base rover. We're going to go into a pretty good dive of the base rover functionality and setup, how we run checklists, how we maintain accuracy, and we really give you a great workflow. We've got some demos, and so we're going to be seeing some demos from out in the field. And then we've got a live review of the CSV and JSON data that is being exported from the Flex. Logistically speaking, we should be running about 60 minutes of total runtime. There is a good chance we'll be a little shorter than that, roughly 50 minutes, give or take, for the presentation, and about 10 minutes for the moderated Q&A at the end. All right, so a unique geospatial situation. If you've been following Bad Elf for a little bit of time, or perhaps you were at the Western Regional Surveyors Conference in Las Vegas in the last few months, you might have seen a presentation about MARFA, Texas. MARFA, Texas is in the southwest part of the state. If you know, the state's pretty big, about 1,000 miles across. MARFA would be to the southeast of El Paso, for an example, along the border with Mexico. This project was something that I personally worked on with a partner of ours, registered land surveyor Will Wing. And in this project, we literally did a 24,000 acre survey, or we at least did the first phase of it. Actually, it was more acres than that. The property is actually a large ranch. It's been owned for quite some time. The Shirley Ranch also has a Airbnb on it. You can see the change of using it for cattle to different types of vacation revenue, things of that nature. The map on the right-hand side is a rough drawn map from the owners of the property. Several generations have owned this property. You can see that it is quite large. I will also say that it was extremely complex. The complexity of the site is actually, you have to take a moment to talk about it. Because it is a 24,000 acre site, or actually, as we said, larger, the survey history on the site is very complex. A lot of it was born and bred from some of the land granting and the railroad expansion. Throughout the years, different parcels were purchased and sold. To say that it is a complex site, geodetically speaking, is an understatement. The size of the site, it was 36 miles of perimeter. So you can say, 12 to 13 miles long at a minimum. This 24,000 acre site, it had limited access. And so you either had to take horses or side-by-sides or quads. There was limited two-track access. Getting through the site took extremely a long amount of time. If you were at the southern end of the site and you needed to get to the north end of the site, you spent several hours driving. Of course, as everybody has with every surveying and mapping job, there are always constraints with time. And so we were up against a time clock, so we needed to have a solution that was very quick and versatile, and it was able to get the job done. We had a limited budget, and so we couldn't deploy a survey crew of 10. There was 2 of us. We had limited cell coverage on the site, so this is important. On the north end of the site, we had relatively good LTE access. If you see on the map where it says MD Bryant Trust Shirley Ranch at the top right-hand corner of your screen, to the left, up there, we were getting, in the north side of the site, pretty good LTE, and that is actually where we set the base station. We were able to use RTK corrected network called 0.1 nav that we offer to set our here point to then set up a base station, which we'll talk about with base Rover here in a little bit. But it's important to note, as you traversed south on the site, the cell phone connectivity got worse and worse and worse until about halfway through the site, it became non-existent. The whole southern half of the site, there was no ability to use network RTK. So we were then forced to use base Rover or a post-processing workflow. Of course, safety concerns were always an issue. The environment, so if you're not familiar with Southwest Texas, it's rolling hills, it's undulating. Every bush and tree there tries to hurt you. It's very similar. It's the start of kind of the Southwest desert. It's not very forgiving, but at the same time, it is not deciduous forest. So lots of different things to consider here. One of the reasons that this is such a compelling site and it's such a compelling use case is that we were able to use a solution called the Bad Elf Flex, and it was able to tackle many different things out there. First, it had all of the accuracies needed that the surveying requirements and the registered land surveyor needed. And so we were able to get survey grade, centimeter or better accuracy via network RTK, Rhinex, and base Rover, all from the same unit. And so a diversity of different ways to collect points on the site with all an extreme amount of accuracy. Also, this, as I mentioned, affordability was a major factor in this project. So you can see here that a standard Bad Elf Flex starts as low as about $3,000 USD MSRP. You're about $6,000 for a network Rover. And as we discuss base Rover here, you're in for about $16,000. Without saying too much, if you've been in the industry a while, you'll notice that these prices comparatively are very, very competitive, and I think we are well placed to swamp the market with an amazing solution, really opening up base Rover to the masses, where perhaps base Rover was traditionally used only by land surveyors. And nowadays, this solution is affordable enough that it can be in the hands of all of the different industries that we polled earlier in the webinar. Last but not least, it's versatile, right? So no project is too big or too small, too simple or too complex. We were able to get it done simply because we were able to switch modes. We were able to utilize third-party softwares. And so we were able to connect to an iOS and Android tablet. We used the ESRI, ArcGIS Online, and Field Maps combination to collect a lot of our GIS data. We also utilized the Bad Elf Flex app itself to collect not only Rhinex, so post-processed, rapid static and static data, but also track logs, instant points, all different types of spot checks. And so it was just a great solution for this, extremely complex project. You can see here, this is the type of terrain with Will and I, and you can see the Bad Elf Flex there on one of our base points. And on the right, you can see the Bad Elf Flex with our base Rover radio. And so what I'm going to do now, now that I've hopefully caught your attention and you're thinking to yourself, hopefully, about big projects or complex projects you've been working on in the past, or perhaps you've got a complex project in the future, especially a project that maybe has limited cell phone connectivity, you're out in the bushes, perhaps you're doing educational research or some type of field work in a foreign country, a developing nation where there's not infrastructure and cell phone connectivity and RTK networks. This is your solution. So I'm going to pass it over with the next slide to Brett Hackelman. So I'm going to go ahead and mute myself. Brett, it is all yours, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. Good morning. So probably as a good foundation, I want to quickly review kind of the different correction services that are supported by the Flex. And as you heard, we use a number of these on that MARFA job site, depending on where we were in the on the ranch. So starting out with just basic autonomous GPS functionality, typically that's in the 5 to 10 meter range. The advantage to autonomous GPS is that it is free and available worldwide, but obviously the accuracy is not really where most GIS or land surveyors are going to need it. In terms of kind of the next level up, SBAS is also a free service provided through the GPS constellation network, but it is regional. So there's only SBAS functionality in kind of the North America, over Europe, parts of Asia, parts of Australia, New Zealand now. And this will, with the Flex being multi-frequency and quad constellation, this will get you down into that 30 to 60 centimeter range, which for a lot of customers is just what they need. Like I said, it is free, but for typically anybody who needs survey grade accuracy, it's again not really exactly what you need. So the next level of correction service that we do offer and support with the Flex is L-band. So this would be again over satellites, but it is a commercial paid subscription service. The big advantage to this is that it is available worldwide. So worldwide you can get 4 to 10 centimeter accuracy, and it really is anywhere in the world, which is a pretty amazing service. It does take some time to acquire that signal, usually on the order of 5 to 10 minutes to even get your first L-band lock on site. And then there is a settling time as well as you're moving between points you're trying to collect. And as I mentioned, it is a paid subscription service. And then kind of the fourth, most commonly used correction service with the Flex Extreme is internet RTK over NTRIP. So this is how we get down to survey grade accuracy in the 1 centimeter range. Very reliable, high accuracy, and depending on where you're doing your work, you may have access to a free network, or you may be using a paid kind of third-party service. And RTK is an amazing tool, but it does require two things. It requires some sort of internet connectivity, usually cellular, and it requires that local RTK network with base stations or coverage in your region. And so sometimes you won't have cellular at all, and so it's really not an option. Or in the times when you do have cellular, there still may not be an RTK network that's actually available. So Base Rover allows you to mix and match some of the advantages and advantages of these different correction services. So the big one, big concept for Base Rover is that you are bringing onto your job site what you need to establish your own local RTK network. And so what that looks like is 2 Flex units mounted on a pole, and each Flex unit has a UHF radio, and you establish one of those Flex units as the base. And the purpose of that base is to stay stationary at a reference point that you define. And because that base unit knows that it's stationary, it can take a look at the variations in the location that it's receiving from the sky, from the satellites, what it's computing. And because it knows it's stationary, it can then calculate what the corrections would be to that signal. So it knows it's not moving, and so any kind of change it sees in location, it can attribute to things like atmospheric conditions that are affecting that signal. It then takes that correction feed and sends it out to one or more rovers over that UHF radio. And so now when you're on the job site, you have your RTK rover, which is essentially the same workflow as what you may use with an RTK network, but you don't need any sorts of cellular connectivity. So the major advantages of base rover setup are really that you can get that survey, centimeter grade accuracy anywhere in the world. You saw the pros and cons of the other services, and the base rover really does solve the problems of what you do when you're in a part of the world that either doesn't have cellular connectivity or doesn't have an RTK network. In terms of workflow, it's a very solid solution for getting that 1 to 2 centimeter accuracy. It's almost instant on. Once the base is transmitting corrections to a rover, it typically takes 5 to 10 seconds for that rover to get into an RTK fixed state. Again, no cellular network is required, and no third-party RTK network is required. For some customers, the fact that you can set up a base rover configuration, paying only the hardware cost to acquire that equipment, basically means no subscriptions were required. So for some jobs, that can make a lot of sense. Where we also see base rover being a great tool is in areas where you are doing work on the same job site, over a series of weeks or months or even years. We see this with archaeology projects and forestry projects all the time, where they're often coming back to the same site. And by being able to set up the base on the same reference point that they maintain, they're able to get very repeatable results in that 1 to 2 centimeter range year over year. So that's a pretty powerful aspect of this. The other one that we hear often from land surveyors especially is that when you get onto a job site, you really don't necessarily know, even on that given day, if I do have access to a network, an RTK service over the internet, that on that day that service may be down, right? Or there might be information that's flowing over that connection that frankly I don't necessarily have a lot of trust in. Because I don't control the whole setup, it means that I have to really put my faith in that correction service. So with base rover, one nice thing is that you really do control the complete network, and you have the ability to really dial up everything in exactly where you need it. So if you based on the poll, we see that a number of you, about half of you, are using RTK today or have used it in the past. So you're base rover today, or you have used it in the past. So everything I've described so far really applies to any base rover network. What I'd like to discuss is where we've kind of taken the base rover system and really optimized and innovated on a few different fronts. So you'll see throughout the remainder of this presentation that we've taken a very checklist-based approach to how you set up a base and a rover and how you use them in the field. We have our company Bad Elf has a long history in aviation, where checklists are very much considered the norm in the cockpit. Obviously, you look at an emergency room or an operating room, and checklists are used all the time. And what's great about checklists is that they actually benefit both a beginner or somebody who's just kind of coming into the field and maybe seeing this with some minimal training. It benefits the newbie as much as it benefits the experienced professional. And the main reason for that is we've all been out on job sites where you actually maybe get a little lax if you've been doing this for a long time, and so errors can certainly creep into the system, whether that's forgetting to set the correct pole height or configuring my hardware to use the wrong datum. These are very common issues that worst case can end up meaning you've wasted an entire day in the field, or best case might mean now you've added a whole bunch of kind of post-processing and fix-up work that you do back in the office. So having a checklist-based workflow allows you to get it right every time, and really does let you satisfy, ensure that all the prereqs are being met. Looking at our base rover solution, because we are built, the Flex is built around a survey grade very modern GNSS engine, we support all constellations and all frequencies as part of our base rover setup. So you're going to be getting the absolute, most amount of information flowing over that correction link, and it ensures that you're going to get the best results in the field. So this does minimize, or allows you to deal with, more challenging environments because you have that diversity of constellations and frequencies. The other thing we saw with other base rover systems was that there wasn't a whole lot in terms of visibility into what the system was doing once you actually are out there with the rover, possibly up to 10 kilometers away from your base. If things failed, they typically just failed and stopped working, but you didn't have a lot of information. So part of our base rover setup, we do have events that flow throughout the system. So if something happens to the base while you're away from it, if it falls over or loses a GPS lock for some reason, the battery gets low, any of these types of conditions, that state information is transmitted out to the rovers over the radio link, and you'll be able to see exactly what what's going on with the system. All of these, and also, however I configure my base in terms of the reference point and the datum that's in use, all that metadata also flows over the radio link to the rovers. So the metadata that you, in your configuration of the system, is captured in the metadata on the rover and can flow all the way into whatever data collection app you're using. So you have for every point or feature that you collect out of the field, you're going to have all that metadata that's really showing you exactly how that solution was arrived at. I mentioned these events and all this metadata. It does get stored on the Flex itself in JSON format, so very open, human readable format. All of our points and track logs are stored in CSV format, so you're not locked into any kind of proprietary file formats, and it's very simple to then integrate this into your back office workflow. Part of that, I mentioned the land surveyors that really need to have a lot of trust in location, in the data that's collected in the field, and possibly defend that even later on, even in court, for example. The nice thing about all these logs are that it really gives you the confidence that you need to be able to look at the data that you've collected and say, yep, for this job site and for this time duration, I didn't have any of these types of issues, or if I did, right, I fix them and it doesn't affect any of the points that I'm using as part of this collection process. So you really do get a nice historical log of what happened on that site that day. The other big advantage to the Flex, because we do have the nice big screen and the user interface there, is that we can support base rover workflows both in standalone, so Flex only, mode, or you can drive all this based on app-based workflows. So depending on what you do in the field, if you already have a phone or tablet that you're using, obviously the app-based workflows are going to give you a very rich UI and integrate well with your system. But for the cases where you just want to go out and set up a base rover configuration and then collect some data, you can do that using just the Flex LCD screen. So that's pretty powerful, especially for those simple jobs where you're just going out and capturing some quick data and you don't want to waste too much time setting up your phone or tablet. And then along the lines of app-based workflows, Base Rover is compatible with any app that's running on your phone or tablet. And then we've also done more integration. We offer an SDK and integration with a number of third-party apps, such as those from ACRE. All right, so how do you link these Flex units together, right? We have we found a UHF radio that has all the features we need in a very compact and affordable package. It does use a Bluetooth link between the Flex unit and the radio, and once you've done the initial pairing, it really is just turning on the Flex unit and the radio is all you have to do on your second day of data collection, and your Bluetooth link is automatically reestablished. So once you've done that initial configuration, getting on the job site and getting things configured is very, very smooth. Our standard radio configuration is a 2-watt radio, and this will give you up to 10-kilometer range. It's important to note with UHF that this is line of sight. So we'll talk a little bit more later in the presentation about kind of doing your site survey and figuring out where you want to place the base for transmitting to the rovers. But line of sight coverage is an important factor. We do support multiple frequencies and protocols. So depending on your site, you can change your frequency to avoid any kind of interference with other systems, or if you have multiple base rovers that may be operating within range of each other. Important to note that a single base can support an unlimited number of rovers. The way we use this system, it is unidirectional, so base is transmitting and doesn't need to receive anything from the rovers. So this also saves power on the rover side. All it needs to do is listen on the frequency for the corrections from the base. Important to note that this radio solution is fully FCC compliant, so it does meet the requirements for the frequency ranges that are commonly used and allowed to be used by surveyors. It does allow you to program your call sign, which can be transmitted in Morse code, or will be transmitted via Morse code, at least every 15 minutes. That is configurable, and it is important to note that any users of our system do need to obtain their own radio license. This is a very easy process. You just need to talk to one of the frequency coordinators that are authorized to do this, to do the license processing, and usually ends up being about $400 all in. So we have a guide that will walk you through the process and recommend one of the two frequency coordinators in the U.S. And lastly, on the radio front, we are going to be bringing a 35-watt radio configuration to the market as well. This obviously for some of the sites you're looking at, such as the MARFA site we mentioned earlier, there are times when that 10-kilometer range isn't quite enough, or you need to deal with you need some more power to deal with terrain. Then that 35-watt radio is a great solution. And that is, the radio license that you get will be legal up to 35 watts. So the same license you can use for both configurations. And then the last thing I'll mention is that we are also looking at supporting repeater mode with this radio hardware. It's already supported by the hardware, and we're just working on the software support now, but this is something we plan to support in a future firmware and app update. Okay. So getting into how you set up a base and rover, the first 3 bullet points here, I kind of file in the category of, kind of your site survey. So, typically you have an idea of where you're going to set up base rover, and, it definitely is beneficial to do some research before you go out in the field. So that's typically where, you're going to look at that site and kind of try to identify what correction services you plan to use in the field, given that everything is working in terms of either cellular coverage or L-band, or in this case base rover. You're typically, you want to look at that site and say, hey, where does it make sense to set up my base? Because typically you're going to get the best range the higher that base is set up on the site to optimize for line of sight coverage. Obviously, any job you're going to be looking at, the safety and security of that site. If you do plan on leaving the base, set up unattended, then you obviously want to think through, is this in a place that's going to be visible and possibly easily stolen? Setting it up somewhere away from a road or away from kind of obvious line of sight to people sometimes can be beneficial. And then as I'm thinking about a job site, I'm also thinking about power. So typical battery life for the Flex and the radio is going to be 12 hours, so usually enough to cover a full day. But if I am, if I want backup power, or if I plan on setting up for longer than that, then the Flex and the radio both support being powered from an external power support source. And so typically you'd use a USB battery bank for the Flex and a 12-volt car battery for the radio. So the really important thing about setting up a base is that this really becomes the truth for your entire, for your rovers. So for your local RTK network. And so typically what that means is that, I really want to make sure that I get the base set up correct. Otherwise, any data that I collect with the rover may be suspect or invalid. And so this is where the checklist-based workflow really comes in. As you can see, the base mode checklist on the right, has steps for confirming or setting the pole height, making sure your pole is vertical, making sure you have a good GPS lock, and that you're going to have enough battery to last your day there on the site. You will use the base mode checklist to also set the reference point, and that's kind of where we get into the discussion around what a reference point is and the different types that we support. And then last thing I'll note here is that with the base, anytime you're running a flex in base mode, it is also capturing a raw log. And so this is really useful because then you can export that as a RINEX log and submit that to a site such as Opus. So for what we found with many of our customers is, they want to collect the same data multiple ways and then always be able to get back and double check it. And so having that RINEX log allows you to do that. So with reference points, with the BattleFlex base rover setup, you have two options. You can use either a known point or a here point. So a known point is really exactly that. It's a point that you know ahead of time, where you can provide some sort of name or identifier, latitude, longitude, ellipsoidal height in meters, and then what datum that information and point is in. Often you'll pull that from an NGS benchmark, data sheet, or if you're returning to a site that you've already set up in the past, you might just enter that in as part of setting up the base reference point. You can export these known points into the app or into the Flex hardware in a CSV file format. If you're using the app, you can also type in this data manually or create a new one from your current GPS position. And then we also do support a custom URL scheme for easily sharing known points across your team. So if you just want to text a known point out or send it through email, that's an easy way to do it as well. And what's nice about known reference points is all of the metadata that's associated with that point does get transmitted to the rovers over that radio link. So you have that metadata all the way down to where the rover's using it. Next slide, we have here reference points. And so this is often called a surveyed in point. And the idea is that you're just going to use, in the case where I don't know, I don't have a known point for where I'm setting up my base. This is where I'll typically, the goal is to basically use whatever the best correction, source or mode is that you can get your flex into at that position to establish the best available lat long height and datum information. So you might use one of the other correction services. If you had, RTK, cellular coverage at one end of your job site, you could use that to establish a good here point. Or you could use a service such as Atlas to do that as well. So worst case, you would just use SBAS, and then you'll have a good here point to start with. And then the important thing to note is with post-processing and with that RINEX file is that you can always come back and post-process that base point later, and then apply that same XYZ offset to the rover points to basically fix up your data in post-processing. All right, so on the rover side, very similar checklist workflow as RTK over NTRIP or a cellular link. Really you're just confirming pole height, double checking that you have good battery life and that you're connected to the radio, and then you can activate your rover mode here. As we mentioned, you can use our Flex token model to set up a rover, just like you would with an NTRIP connection over cellular. So if you need to use a token to upgrade your standard for the 24-hour period, you would do that as part of this checklist as well. And then once you're in Rover mode, as I mentioned, it works with any data collection method, whether you're using the Flex app, the Flex hardware, or any third-party app that's connected over Bluetooth. All right, so now I'm going to send this over to Dave. We have a recording of live base Rover setup that we did yesterday out in the field, and I'll send it over to you, Dave.
We'll begin our base rover workflow by setting up the Battle Flex Extreme, acting as the base over a point, in this case just outside of our office adjacent to the Scottsdale Airport in the outdoor furnace we'd like to call home, Arizona. This can be a previously known location with the coordinates preloaded onto your device, or you could record a new point to use as your reference point. We recommend shooting over a point that offers an open sky view away from obstructions, is in a safe place to avoid theft, and ideally over a monument with known coordinates. Ensure your radio is mounted to the field pole securely, and power on your Flex by depressing the power button for a handful of seconds. When you begin to see the LEDs start to flash on the Flex, power on your radio and you should see more flashing lights. Your survey pole may look similar to a Christmas tree at this point. After you enjoy the light show for about 15 seconds while the hardware is booting, verify the Flex is oriented perfectly vertical with your bubble level or the integrated tilt sensor on the Flex. You're now ready to pull out your phone or tablet to start the process of completing your checklist for the first half of the setup process, the base. We'll switch over to our phone screen here and begin by selecting base from a correction mode. If you're interested in collecting a HERE reference point, you could increase your absolute accuracy by selecting RTK or Atlas L-band from the list instead of SBAS to increase the quality of your recorded point. Your choice depending on the availability of internet at your location and your requirements of absolute versus relative accuracy. When the checklist appears, the top 2 steps should be completed already, as we're using an Extreme Unlocked Flex, which is a requirement to activate base mode. Next, we'll confirm a pole height of 2 meters, which is the standard height of the pole that is included with the Flex in our Pioneer package bundle. The following step in the checklist failed due to the Flex either being tilted to the side or completely out of calibration, so we'll go ahead and calibrate it and continue through the list. You'll see that we skipped over the previous 2 steps, as we already have a GPS fix and a fully charged battery, so we don't have to risk losing our correction feed 2 miles from your base in the middle of nowhere. So the step we're on now, we want to choose our base reference point. We'll either choose a new point by tapping the blue capture button as so and taking a 5-second time point, or we can use a previously recorded known point instead that we uploaded onto our device. You can see our accuracy was 14 centimeters from this point. It's not quite good enough for us. We want to use our known point that is already well established. You can upload established coordinates that were previously post-processed or shot over for an extended period of time, such as a survey monument. Enter the name, lat, long, and altitude, but just to be sure to include the datum of the coordinates, whether it is WGS84, ITRF, 98 through 2011, or other from the list. Alternatively, you can enter coordinates manually or use the receiver to record an instant point to use as a reference by tapping the plus icon next to location. Tap the Use Current Location button and notice how the datum is filled in automatically when we record our point. For this demonstration though, we're going to use a known point from our list as a reference. Now we just need to pair the Flex to the radio via Bluetooth and we're ready to activate base mode. You can verify your radio is connected successfully to the base after completing the pairing process when the Bluetooth indicator starts blinking green. You can also verify this by viewing the list of paired devices on the Flex UI. For subsequent connections, the radio will connect to the paired Flex automatically. Now that the radio is connected, we can complete the checklist and begin transmitting corrections. You can confirm that the data is being transmitted out by viewing the status section at the bottom of the screen and verify the number of packets and kilobytes are increasing. So at this moment, I'm sure a few of you are thinking you like the option to start the base without the use of a connected mobile device. Fear not, we have replicated the checklist process on the Battle Flex UI for use as a backup in case your phone runs out of battery, overheats, gets misplaced, or you simply don't feel like introducing another piece of equipment to the workflow. We walk through the same steps on the Flex's transflective display as we did on our app, and we'll be up and running. Begin by selecting base from the GNSS corrections options, and the first step of verifying connection to the radio and satellites is already checked. Next, we'll confirm we're using a 2-meter survey pole and evaluate that the Flex's tilt is within our accepted tolerance. Finally, we'll select whether or not we want to use a previously recorded location, a known or HERE point, And whether it's going to be in RTK or SBAS, it just depends on what correction services we have available at the time. We're going to use a known point, and then we'll be able to start our base. So this will transfer us back to that base screen with the 3 screens with all the metadata we need, sort of locks us in there. And so when we get to the screen, the large number at the bottom represents the amount of bytes that have been transmitted by your radio. So as long as the number is increasing, your base is working as intended. While the Flex is in base mode, it is also recording a raw log in a Rhinex file that can be post-processed using a program like Opus offered by the NGS. Stopping the base early will give a warning, as Opus requires a 15-minute file at minimum to submit to their service. Both the raw log and any events that occur while you're using the base will automatically be saved once you exit out of base mode. So our base is currently transmitting corrections, but nobody's receiving them. Let's fix that by grabbing our second survey pole with our Bad Elf Flex that's extreme unlocked with a 24-hour token. Don't worry about the point you set up on with the Rover, since we're just going to move it around anyway. Just ensure you're within Bluetooth range of your mobile device, approximately 10 meters or so. We'll power on our Flex and radio just like before with the base. Ensure that you connect to the radio that has not already been connected to the base, as you'll probably see both on your parent screen, and pull out your mobile device to complete the second half of the checklist. You might recognize the screen from earlier with a few slight alterations. So we're back over here on the phone. We're just going to go back to correction mode just like before, but this time we're going to select Rover instead of base. So we pop open the Rover checklist. You can see that it's pretty similar workflow. We're going to confirm our pole height since we've already connected to our radio. That radio is speaking to our base since we're on the same channel, and we can actually select that panel right there. And we'll start seeing the metadata from the base. So you can see the name of the Flex that you're connected to as the base, what firmware it's running, the battery of both the radio and the Flex, as well as what you're using for the reference point, lat, lon, and datum. So you can see our Flex is in extreme mode. We activated a token to use this, and we can just click activate Rover mode, and now we're receiving corrections from our base. Just like the base, you can see the packets at the bottom there, they're increasing. Just this time we're receiving rather than transmitting them. You should see a green light on your radio instead of a red as you're receiving corrections instead of sending them out. And just like the base, we have a few Rover exclusive screens that you can scroll through. If you look back at the app, you'll see that our Flex is now indicated as a Rover, so you don't get the two mixed up. Finally, if we do tilt the base a little bit, we'll get a notification, we'll have an error, we'll stop receiving corrections, and this will be noted on our metadata once we export all the data off the base. So now that we've got our base established and transmitting, our Rover connected to the radio set to the same channel as the base, we're prepared to go off and complete our survey.
All right, to support our standalone workflow, you can record points utilizing the Rover by simply tapping the center button twice to collect a point that can later be exported onto a computer in a CSV format, which is what you're seeing right now. This file includes all the required information to remove uncertainty of data quality, so you have all of the pieces to the puzzle when you need to reconstruct your results for proving survey integrity during QA/QC. This includes timestamps, of course, latitude and longitude, number of satellites, horizontal and vertical RMS accuracy, your correction type, which will be RTCM3 when using a base Rover workflow, geoid, and antenna height. And finally, your orthometric and ellipsoidal elevations. So we also produce a raw log when doing base Rover, and these raw logs can be used for post-processing and applying an offset after the fact. As mentioned before, we also produce a base event log. And so for even more proof your survey was successful, the base will log any adverse events that occurred while it was active and sending corrections. You can see right here that a tilt error was detected and then cleared shortly thereafterwards. Finally, in conjunction with the aforementioned Bad Elf Flex features, you can leverage a mobile data collection solution such as ArcGIS field maps to capture points with extremely powerful customizable forms that allow you to record not only your spatial location with extreme accuracy, but all relevant attributes about your target feature in addition. With that said, let me hand it back to Nick. Thanks.
Okay, so we have a couple questions here, and I'd like to go ahead and get them started. But first, I'm going to go ahead and throw the second polling question up. And so, if you have just a second, you can start doing that as well while we're doing the Q&A. So I'll launch that in the background, and let's get to some questions. So one of the questions is, can the Bad Elf base send corrections to other brands of GNSS receivers with a radio? Brett, how about you take that question?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a few different aspects to this. In terms of the actual UHF radio, this radio does support many of the common industry standard formats, or I'll say de facto standards, that are used by other GNSS base rover setups. So protocol compatibility and frequency-wise, the radio hardware certainly can support interoperability with other systems. We do transmit corrections in RTCM format. So for as long as it's a fairly modern GNSS system, the rovers can handle that, then that would technically be feasible. A few of the advanced features that we support, such as the metadata flow, the alerts and things like that, obviously wouldn't be compatible with third-party hardware unless they made changes on their side to support it. Today, right now, we sell and support kind of the end-to-end configuration with the Flex being a base and rover. But we certainly would consider supporting other hardware in the future. So if you're interested, or if you have a deployed fleet of hardware that you'd like to use, please do get in touch, and we could certainly talk through kind of the technical and timeframe aspects of that.
That's great, Brett. Actually, I've got another technical question for you, if you don't mind staying on the hook. It was mentioned during the presentation that the base rover can utilize multi-constellation from the multi-constellations of the satellites in space. Can you talk about how that is an opportunity for base rover, say potentially over the RTK network?
Sure. So what you'll see with, historically, the history of GPS in general, right? GPS was kind of the first network that was available. GLONASS was available shortly thereafter. And then it was only more recently where we had Galileo and Baidu come online. And so what you'll find with a lot of existing RTK networks available through NTRIP is that they may only support GPS or only GPS and GLONASS as part of their correction feed. Because we're dealing with very modern hardware and a modern GNSS engine, we've built in support for the quad constellation and all the frequencies from the very beginning. And so, in terms of what this gives you in the field, it really gives you more satellites to use. They're going to correlate. It's all about having the same set of satellites that are being seen by the base and the rover, so that the rover can apply the corrections to all the available satellites. As with anything, more satellites is better, especially in areas where you might have some sort of sky, visibility issues, right? Whether you're operating near structures or trees or terrain that might prevent you from having a full sky view. So that's really where the quad constellation provides a nice benefit.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Brett. We've got another question here, and I can take this one because it's nice and easy. Do we have base rovers available for purchase today? And we absolutely do. So we have plenty of stock. If you are at all interested, you can absolutely reach out to us. We are fortunate enough that we planned ahead, and the global supply chain is not influencing us on the base rover. So we have plenty of stock available for anybody that's interested. I've got another question here. Hey, Dave, I think this one was going to be for you because they're asking about the field person. They ask, what is the #1 advantage of the base rover being in the field? And then how much does that all weigh?
Yeah, so it's not as heavy as you think. It's a pretty lightweight solution. It really depends on how heavy your field pole and your bipods are. So we have a couple of nice, really advanced carbon fiber materials to make our bipods here, make life a little bit easier on me. So my biceps aren't dying by the end of the day. But I'd say the greatest advantage is just the fact that you get that survey grade accuracy no matter where you are. you control the whole solution. So sometimes using an RTK network, the base station you want to use might be down and not operational. Here, you have control over the entire setup from point A to point B. And, you can receive those corrections anywhere, no matter if you have those internet connection. You're really just really free and flexible to complete that survey workflow, no matter where you are and when you're doing it. So really nice solution.
Appreciate that, Dave. I just want to throw it out there. I really like the fact that you were wearing PPE in that video. It makes the safety person in my heart very happy. So thank you for that.
Safety first.
We've got another question here. We also have a special guest in attendance, Larry Fox, our VP of Marketing and Business Development. Larry, I think, said he wanted to answer a couple questions. So we're going to throw this one at Larry. It is also technical based, but it asks, what is the operational time of the Flex and the radio?
I could definitely hop in on that one. So typically the Bad Elf Flex will operate 8 to 10 hours, no problem, upwards of 13 depending upon the level of charge. The radio, on the other hand, tends to be the limiting factor. The transmitting radio is spec'd at 8 hours. The receiving radio could last a little bit longer. So if you're going to be operating for more than 8 hours in the field, you might want to think about an external charging solution for your base station.
That's great. You know what? While we got you on the horn, we've got another follow-up question. Can I use an external antenna for the radio?
So the answer is yes. It's very common for folks that are operating in environments that that might be challenged as far as, undulation of the terrain, etc. So as long as you're using a standard 50 ohm TNC cable, going to an antenna, you can mount it on a much larger mast. As long as the antenna is operating in the appropriate range, would be the 450 to 470 megahertz range. Yes, you can use an external antenna, and that could definitely help improve the range of the base.
So I think that about does it. We want to say thank you again from the depth of our heart from Bad Elf, you attending this webinar. Please just take a look at our YouTube channel. If you would, go ahead and follow us there, and on other social media platforms. You'll always be able to find the latest and greatest materials. Again, that does it for our educational webinar today. Thank you, everybody.